Hi, Dr. J. Smith here again. What a year it's been, 2020. I'm sure many of you in the future, when you look back at this year, you're going to think of this year as the year of the pandemic because it has affected all of us, you who are watching, me here in the United States. The whole world has been affected by the pandemic. But there have been other things happening this year that are also significant. We've already gone through much of the difficulties for the Qur'an, the holes in the narrative, the difficulties with the ahruf and the qira'at, and that has been taking up our time in the last 3 months. But while that was happening, another interesting set of articles were being published. One in January of this year. On the 10th of January, an article was published by a Saudi journalist called Ahmad Hashem on the Saudi Opinions website. And what was fascinating about this article is that finally, as a journalist, as a Saudi journalist, admitted that there were errors in the Quran, and not just insignificant errors, and not just a few. He talked about as many as 2,500 errors. He said that the reason for this is because it was a human book, not a sacred book. And then he gave many examples of these errors, some of which he referred to. Let me just quote what he said. The Quran in its present form contains errors of spelling, syntax, and grammar. It is estimated that there were about 2,500 such mistakes. They were made by the committee tasked with the compiling the Quran and include the addition or omission of letters in some words or the substitution of one letter for another. And he gives example after example after example. One he gives in chapter 68, verse 6, where there was an extra ya that was added. In chapter 25, verse 4, I won't go into all the intricacies of what he said there. In chapter 28, verse 9, but he goes and gives reference to these errors. And then he goes on and says, when the Quran was written, the Uthmani script, it was formed by several of the Prophet's companions and several members of the following generation, and they deserve credit for the efforts they made according to their ability at that time. However, the legacy they left can be developed and amended if there is a better and more convenient alternative, as was done in later years when diacritics and punctuation marks were added. That's the ahruf and the qira'at that we've been talking about for the last 3 months. The time has come, he says, to amend the spelling errors and other errors it contains and adapt it to the rules of the Arabic language and grammar, for the Quranic text is open to any amendment that will make Allah's book easier for Muslims to read and linguistically more correct. Woohoo! So that was in January 10th of this year. Huge admission. But he wasn't the only one. Then on July 20th, which is just a little over a month ago, another liberal Saudi website called Elaf printed an article by Jarjes Gulizada, who is a Kurdish-born, Iraqi-born, actually, editor of the Iraqi magazine Baghdad. So he's an editor who's now publishing in this Saudi website. And he talks about the pandemic, and he mentions that because of the pandemic, there have been a lot of changes made, like, for instance, to the way people worship. Because of the pandemic, and you cannot be too close to everybody, there have been rules that have been applied that stipulate that you must be far apart. And he says, because of this flexibility, that we therefore need to also realize that the Quran is not a book that is for all times and all places. For it must modernize, and we must modernize. And he said one of the reasons he says is because the Quran does have errors. So therefore there is room for flexibility. What errors? Well, he talks about Ahmad Hashem and the fact that he found about 2,500 errors. And then he added some more of his own that Hashem did not refer to. Omissions of letter here or omissions of letter there, such as chapter 3, verse 86, where Mecca was supposed to be written, but the word Becca was written instead. It goes to chapter 22, verse 55. And what's fascinating, let me just read his quote. For all these reasons, and in order to present the correct form of the text, free of errors and obscurities, it is incumbent upon us, for scientific, rational, religious, and linguistic reasons, to re-examine the Uthmanic script of the Quran and rewrite it in the correct manner, so as to amend all the language mistakes that appear in the Quran and remove from it all traces of error. And then he goes on to say, finally, I stress once again that the time has come to look into the Islamic, Christian, and Jewish texts from a rational and logical perspective. It is time for the human mind to become the supreme judge, and freeing itself of mystical and irrationality. I assuming he's talking about those who hold and elevate the Quran to such height, and that this he considers to be irrational and mystical. Amend the text, he says, and ideological mistakes that exist in the religious text due to human error and due to the undeveloped state of the writing system 1 or 2,000 years ago. Well, hold on a minute. You might say, yeah, okay, but are these guys really representative of Islam today? Well, let's just take a look at this Elaf website where our good friend Jarjes Gulizada wrote. Who is the editor for this? His name is Uthman al-Omeir. Is he someone insignificant? No, he isn't. He's quite significant. He is a close friend of King Salman, who is the king of Saudi Arabia, and an advisor to Crown Prince Mohammed, who is Salman's son, who is the one that really actually runs Saudi Arabia today. So this is not someone who is insignificant. This is not an editor who we should just slough off as being someone who is nothing more than a floozy or doesn't represent certainly the powers that be. You can see he does represent the powers that be. Why is this coming up right now? Well, I think for very good reason. Not only because of what has been happening with the academic investigation of the Quran, and we have been investigating, and a lot of us have been investigating. Listen, these errors are nothing new to us. We know what our good friend Don Brubaker has found just with looking around, finding around 4,000 of these changes. Now, of course, Muslims would like to say these are nothing more than scribal errors. Folks, these cannot be scribal errors. You cannot be that inept and that incompetent. 4,000 of these errors. And these are significant in that they almost in all the cases, not everyone, but almost in all the cases, when these are corrected, they standardize the text, which means these are intentional corrections. But you can see 2 different articles in 1 year, 2020, that are finally admitting that they've got to get this book back to its, really, to its correct, need to correct it, bring it back to a corrected text. Blaming it on the earliest committee, those who put it together way back 1,400 years ago, and saying now we need to make sure that we do this today, and even excusing it and said if we can change and be flexible enough to change different ways of worship, such as separating people when they pray, which the Quran has an injunction for. If we can be that flexible, then why can we also not be flexible to bring the Quran back to its corrected state? Which is fascinating, because then he went on and said we need to do the same thing with all scriptures. Well, folks, let me tell you something. The Bible, we've been doing that for years. In fact, the Bible has done that, has already had that kind of test. Because we don't make the claims the Quran, or I should say that Muslims make about the Quran. We don't make the same claims. We've always said that the Bible is written by men. Muslims have never said that. They would never accept that it's written by men. Well, here you have 2 journalists that are saying that very thing. You're having 2 Muslims that are saying that very thing. These are not floozies. These are well-known journalists, and they're also writing in Saudi Arabia, the center of Islam. Folks, if you really want to come back to a book that's already passed, that doesn't have these problems, that we don't have to excuse for, and that we don't have to rewrite again to eradicate all these errors like you do with the Quran, come on back to the Bible. Come on back to the Bible. It's fascinating. This is becoming quite a year. And it's going to go down, at least in my memory, as probably one of the best years. In my almost 40 years of working in Islam, I've never seen it this good. I've never seen this many changes that are coming about. I've never seen the Quran put up to scrutiny like we are before. I've never seen admissions, not only by Yasir Qadhi and Shabir Ally, but now by 2 other writers, Ahmad Hashem and Jarjes Gulizada. Thank God they're being honest. Thank God they're admitting and saying what most will not say. Now, they are getting reactions, huge reactions. There have been furious reactions. And there have been calls for their insolence and insulting the Quran, harming Allah's book, as it says. That's what happens when you stand against the norm and when you stand against the radicals over here on the right. who do not want anybody to touch that book. Why? Because they believe this book is eternal. They believe this book was sent down to one man. They believe this book was complete at the time of Whitman, and they believe this book has not changed, not one word, not one letter, as we're finding it. It's had thousands of changing. They're even admitting at least 2,500 errors. Well, folks, I think I've said enough. I think you know where we're going with this. I think you know what has to happen. This book needs to be brought back down to earth again. And it's being done so now by 4 different scholars and journalists just in this year. You know, what's waiting for us in 2021? Who knows? Come with me. We'll be there, and we'll keep reporting. This is Jathan. Over and out.